Mr. Hagmark.
Commissioner Keller, Chair Keller, sorry, Commissioners, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resources Manager, here to give another Stage 3 drought update. We have a very busy agenda today. In fact, we have Tom Faram from the County Water Agency here to speak on one of the items, but we'll get started here. Rainfall totals, we talked about community conservation efforts, our current water supply strategy, update on our recycled water status, and again, an update from Tom Faram on Lake Cachuma and the County Water Agency's efforts, drought response capital project highlights, and then water conservation program, and then come back to the 2015 urban water management plan update. So, in essence, we've basically ended our rainy season. Gibraltar just over 50% of normal with 13 inches of rain. Lake Cachuma 60% of normal, and downtown Santa Barbara at 65%. Certainly not what we were hoping for or looking for to help us out this year. So planning again for continued drought conditions. This is the latest from the California Drought Monitor. As you can see, the extreme drought situation encompasses the Santa Barbara County. Seems to be almost the heart of this drought. There has been some reprieve in Northern California, which has kind of created a tale of two cities for the state, the haves and the have-nots, and we happen to be in the category of have-nots, and so as I mentioned, we'll be continuing to plan for continued drought conditions. There's a silver lining to this drought. It's the conservation efforts of our community. We did have a change from the item in the agenda. The draft presentation or the draft council agenda report noted a 27% conservation. We went back and looked at that, and it's actually a 41% conservation. What kind of threw it off for the first time, we're starting to accumulate state water in Cachuma, and typically, and we'll see this in the manager's report, state water just passes through the lake, and so our accounting system didn't really have a storage of state water in there, and so it was assuming that all that state water got delivered. Once we went through and changed the calculations, the conservation for April was actually 41%, which is very significant and impressive at this point. That brings our cumulative average now to 35% since declaring a Stage 3 back in May of 2015. Our water supply strategy, we are in year 5, and we have ample supplies to meet demands through this year. You can see here, we have the use of imported water and excess capacity from other agencies that we plan to use to make sure that we can deliver the water that this community needs. We will be utilizing our groundwater. We do have some remaining Cachuma water that we plan on exhausting by the end of this year and will help us get to the summer. And then we have recycled water. Looking out into 2017, conservation becomes just an absolute essential item in helping us to meet demands. Desal coming online in the fall is going to be essential as well. It's basically broken up the 10,000 acre feet of water that we need to get through the next year is basically broken up approximately 30% desal, 30% imported, 30% groundwater, and then the 10% being miscellaneous water from recycled and other sources. And we still have a planned shortage out in year 7, and we're continuing to focus on solutions to that. We see importing water as being a strong potential to meet that demand if we have continued drought conditions. So where did we end? We did get a final state water allocation of 60%, which is the best we've seen in many, many years. That is approximately 2,000 acre feet of water that we'll be receiving from that. We also completed the purchase of supplemental water from the Antelope Valley East Kern State District, and that's about 4,000 acre-feet of water. This certainly helps extend our supplies through this continued drought. However, the challenges are now kind of focused on the limitations of conveyance, and that's going to be one of the focuses we're going to continue to discuss and watch closely. We are, as I mentioned, planning to use the capacity of other agencies, the unused capacity, and that will be coming up on a monthly basis as each agency is adjusting their deliveries to the lake, and so that's going to be a critical component for us. We have in the last 2 months been able to take advantage of some significant capacity left on the table by Montecito and Carpinteria, who have shifted their deliveries to later in the summer. That has helped us to kind of start stockpiling some state water in the lake to help us meet demands later in the summer. Cachuma storage as a buffer, that's just going to be a big part of this year, but even more significant next year. Being able to build up that reserve in the lake to help us meet those peak demands is going to be critical. We are looking at the chance that storage buffer could be completely depleted by fall and may require some short-term water use restrictions. We'll be watching that. Likely at this time, those restrictions wouldn't be needed until probably late August into September. But hopefully we're able to take advantage of the extra capacity. Conservation is more than 35%, then we should have adequate supplies to get us through that peak demand. As far as demand management goes, we do have rates, which we'll be talking about later in today's meeting, but those will be going into effect on July 1st. Cumulative average reduction is currently at 35%. And state regulations right now, we do not foresee additional statewide regulations this year. Staff continues to monitor it. It appears that the state is taking actions to pull back because half the state is out of the urgent drought measure, and so they're kind of putting it back into the hands of the agencies to determine what they need to do, which has been our direction this whole time. When our requirement was actually 12%, and we've been asking our community for 25% and now 35%. So, so city regulations, we do not anticipate the need for new regulations at this time due to consistent conservation achievements. However, there may be a need for short-term. We're thinking 6 to 12 weeks, where regulations limiting water use during peak time. Right now, the triggers might be conservation falling below 35%, or reductions in imported water deliveries from what we've planned. Temporary regulations restricting water use could entail limitations on outdoor sprinkler use. That's kind of what we're focusing on, we need a certain amount of conservation, and I think as we get closer, we'll know more about how we get that little bit of conservation that we need. So basically not an outdoor watering moratorium, but a restriction on the use of sprinklers. People can hand water their lawns, and the use of drip will continue to be a viable option. This is what we're considering, and we'll be continuing to develop this and bring something back for further discussion. Recycled water status. So the latest, just recapping, the facility was designed to produce 2.5 MGD. It has yet to produce that. It has shown that it can sustainably produce 750,000 gallons a day. Recently, we've made some operational changes and continue to try and push this. We've brought on a consultant who specializes in filter operations, and they're assisting us now. But we've gotten the facility up to 1 MGD. Our goal is to get it up to at least 1.5 MGD. At 1.5 MGD, we feel like we can start to meet some of the peak demands that we're anticipating this summer. We are still planning to use the Valverde well, which produces about 0.2 MGD. So at this point, if we can't get up to that 1.5 MGD, we are anticipating a demand exceeding what non-potable water we have available. We are considering a 20 to 35% temporary voluntary reduction. This is similar to what we did last year. Of course, if we can avoid it, we'd like to, but given our potable water situation, we feel that putting any potable water into the system is not desirable or necessary. It shouldn't be necessary at this point for landscaping. And so we're going to continue to watch this. We feel like by mid-June we should have an idea of whether we're going to be able to hit that 1.5 MGD or higher production. And so June should be a lively discussion about, hopefully we're going to have adequate water, but if not, we will be preparing to issue a voluntary reduction, request for voluntary reduction. Last year, just to note, recycled customers did achieve a 35% voluntary conservation, and if we can achieve that again this year, that would put us in a position where we'd be using minimal, if any, potable water in the system. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Fairham, the Assistant Public Works Director for the county, to talk a little bit about the County Water Agency and its efforts and how they work with the Cachuma project and the member units.
Thanks for coming and informing us. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Again, my name is Tom Fairham. I'm with the County Public Works Department. And in my capacity, I oversee the County Water Agency and the County Flood Control District. So what I'd like to do is just go through a couple of the items that the Water Agency does, and then we'll maybe turn our focus to Lake Cachuma and talk about where we are on Lake Cachuma. But just briefly, the County Water Agency is actually a special district of the state of California, which its boundaries are the border of the county. So while it's a special district, it is administered by the Board of Supervisors, with the Board of Supervisors acting as the Board of Directors for the County Water Agency. The County Water Agency was actually originally set up to contract for 2 federal projects that came to Santa Barbara County back in they were planned in the 40s and implemented in the 50s, that being the Twitchell project up in northern Santa Barbara County, and of course the Cachuma project, which serves the South Coast and the San Ynez Valley. Over the years, our involvement in Cachuma and Twitchell have varied depending on its need. Yield studies, siltation surveys. We've done updated sediment surveys to find the capacity of both those reservoirs over time. Provided water availability forecasts based on ongoing drought operations, and then also have done items such as inflow forecasts based on both flood flow forecast inflows, and then after the flood peak, how much water is in the system yet to run into Lake Cachuma, which is helpful to determine how full the lake would get if it's not spilling, or how long a spill would go, which would allow member units access to free spill water. Other items that the Water Agency has done over the years includes all sorts of technical studies. The San Ynez River model, which now is being looked at for a conversion to what's called riverware. I mentioned sediment surveys and then other technical items as needed. Groundwater. The Water Agency has been involved in groundwater throughout the county for a long time, mostly just historical monitoring. We have a contract with the United States Geological Survey to monitor wells throughout the county, a couple hundred wells, which helps track the status of our groundwater basins. Most recently, the state has implemented new regulations, first with what's called CASGEM, which is California. It's basically monitoring the groundwater levels. And then now most recently, the SGMA process, which is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which requires various groundwater basins to be in a sustainable state within the next 20 years. Other things that we've done which help benefit both the Twitchell and the Cachuma project include a cloud seeding program every year, of which the city is a partner in that project, which we're very appreciative. However, water purveyors throughout the county help fund that, of which the Water Agency pays half of that, and then the purveyors pay the other half, so it's a cooperative program. We have also been the centerpiece of the Integrated Regional Water Management Planning effort, or IRWMP, of which our county, including the city, has received many millions of dollars in grant funds that have come to us. And then we've also done other items such as what's called the RWIP, or the Regional Water Management Water Efficiency Program. And that's a program, again, with all the water purveyors, and the county water agency helps support that. And we do all sorts of things, including get grants for, I believe, RWIP got the conversion of turf through the USBR grants and other items like that. And then most recently, we completed a long-term water study at the direction of our board, which looks out many years to see what available water supplies, could be for our community. Again, north to south, recognizing North County is in a little different situation than South County, and recognizing those differences. What are the available sources? We're funded through a number of areas. We do get a dedicated portion of the property tax as set by Proposition 13. We also get intergovernmental revenue, like money from purveyors for RWEP and cloud seeding and IRWIMP. And then also, we are also actively pursuing grants as well. So now what I'd like to do is switch more to Lake Cachuma. And Mr. Hagmark has put a graph up on the screen, which shows basically where we try to track every drop, counting the drops now, Lake Cachuma. And we do this on a monthly basis at month end. And this particular graph is as of April 30th. And the reason why it comes out, this has just basically come out, is because we get the final reports from the Bureau of Reclamation for the downstream water accounts, which is that big orange bar in the middle there, and then also how much carryover water the Cachuma member units, including the city, have in the lake, and that's reported to us by the Cachuma Operations and Maintenance Board. And then other items such as the fish account and imported water come from different sources. So what we end up with is showing where the lake is and how much water is left. And at a total of about 28,000 acre feet, you can see that water available for delivery to the member units, and I refer to the member units as the 5 agencies that participate in the Cachuma contract. That includes the San Ynez River Water Conservation District, ID1, Goleta Water District, the City of Santa Barbara, Montecito Water District, and Carpinteria Water District. So,
could you describe how the minimum pool was established?
Okay, I'll move into that. So the minimum pool was established by the contract upgrade back in 1994, early 90s, ultimately signed by the Water Agency in, I believe, 1996. And I think the minimum pool has a function of a couple of different items. One is that you have a facility that is a living lake, that we want to make sure that we have a unique microenvironment out there at Cachuma Lake. If you've ever been up there and been on the Eagle tours, you can really appreciate the environment that we have up there. And we want to be sure that we preserve a living lake. Second, we have an issue of conveyance of state water through the reservoir, which all the South Coast member units are becoming more and more reliant on, because state water is pumped in at the dam. Currently, the pump barge, as it sits, is about midway to the top of the lake, which doesn't really exist anymore because the lake's so low, but near to the Tecolote Tunnel. Right now, the Cachuma Operations Maintenance Board, COM, is moving that pump barge closer to the park itself. But to stretch that gap, the lake was designed to be utilized as the conveyance facility to get state water from the dam to the Tecolote Tunnel through the pump barge. So, and then lastly, there is an operating park that has hundreds of thousands of visitors a year that come to this community and add to our economic vitality, including the city of Santa Barbara's, because most of them come from the south and would come through the city. So I think the minimum pool functions for a number of valuable purposes and deserves to be maintained, if nothing else, for your viability of moving the state water project through the lake.
So numerically, was there a basis for coming up with that figure, the 12,000?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure of the actual basis for it, other than in prior contracts, the minimum pool is higher. I believe the minimum pool, as the lake was originally established, I think was 32,000, and it was reduced. So the actual basis for what that was calculated at, I don't know how that came about, or whether it was a negotiated number trying to balance all of these issues, because obviously water supply is a paramount need of Lake Cachuma, but it also has other vital functions as well, and they all work together quite well. I don't think one trumps any of the others, but there is a level where, unlike Gibraltar, where it can actually go totally dry, I don't think that would be a desirable case for anybody in the case of Lake Cachuma. It wouldn't serve anybody.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Tom, does the evaporation, which is given to each of these categories, does that also affect the minimum pool? Do they actually take a percentage of evaporation also?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Davis, I believe that's something that we'll get to when there's no other source to be evaporated. And we can talk about the evaporation, maybe go into that, because that's really the problematic issue that we have now.
Right.
We have gotten to a point where there is no other account to evaporate. The minimum pool is stated in the contract as 12,000. It's not evaporated from the time the lake spills over time. So we're going to get down, and that 12,000 is preserved. Now, when there's no other water in the lake and you continue to have evaporation, what's going to happen? Well, obviously, you can't stop evaporation, so it's going to continue. But until then, what we did in working with the member units and the Bureau of Reclamation is heading into this water year, which starts October 1 of last year, so October 1, 2015, we had a small sliver of unallocated water, and that's that blue slice right at the top. And what we did is agree with all the member units that starting October 1, we are going to have carryover maintained whole and subject to no evaporation until that unallocated water is gone, which is kind of what happens in the lake anyways. Evaporation goes on every single year. So after the lake first spills and then the member units are taking their water, there's evaporation going on, and that's the water that is yet to be allocated. It's unallocated water that's evaporating. It's not the minimum pool. It's not the downstream water credits. It's not the fish accounts. It's water that is yet to be allocated. So that's kind of what we did this year. But there's a big difference this year. By contract, carryover water is subject to evaporation. So when you start a beginning year in a normal year and the full 25,000 acre feet is allocated to the member units, that water is not evaporated through that whole water year. So it stays intact. Now, evaporation is happening, so other water is being evaporated, which is your future water that's being evaporated, but current water is held. When you have held whole. When you get into carryover water is subject to evaporation proportional to the volume in the lake. So when the lake is lower, your carryover water takes a bigger hit. We actually we're hitting a point where...
Doesn't your evaporation rate go down also as the lake gets lower?
The evaporation rate goes down, but the proportion goes up. Because there's less water left in the lake. Normally, when you have a lake that's at 193,000 and you have 23 or 25,000 allocated, or in the case of almost a full lake and a carryover of a couple thousand, the percentage is quite small. Now it's 22% of the water left in the lake is your carryover. So it would take, and considering that the other accounts aren't evaporated, it takes a huge hit. And that's the unfortunate reality of where we got. We got to this point extremely fast, and now the reality is that evaporation is going to take its toll because we got here this fast. Now, going back to what I was indicating is the start of this year, we worked out a deal with the Bureau of Reclamation to say, look, let's maintain the carryover water whole and not subject it to evaporation, and take the entire lake's evaporation out of the unallocated water sliced at the top. We're slowly burning through that. That will accelerate as we get into the warmer months, and then they'll reach a point in time where the party's over, and then carryover water will be evaporated, and will be evaporated quite significantly because there's nothing else to evaporate. We're just at that point where there's no it's a zero-sum game. There's nothing
So
left.
there really isn't an incentive for the conservation of the carryover water, because in fact it's going to eat itself up pretty quick once you get there.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Davis, to the extent that where we're at now, that's an issue, but it leads to a point of that we not get to this point again in the future, where we have a safe yield issue, where you have a assured allocation of water that you don't have to worry about this. It also sets up the question of maybe as we get to the lower end of the lake again in future years, that we have an evaporation pool that would then be planned from the start, that we would have that pool of water left that would allow your water to be kept in there whole. But it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah,
that will simply take away water that could be otherwise allocated in other years. Water does evaporate, and I think part of the differences here is that when you look at your other sources like state water, if you hold state water in San Luis Reservoir, it's a freebie. You don't get charged evaporation. But that doesn't mean evaporation isn't happening in San Luis Reservoir either. It's just that the state calculates it and has basically, in effect, an evaporation calculation built in, so your numbers are smaller. So you can store water in there, and it sounds great, but in reality, if you were subject to evaporation, that number would be bigger too, and then you'd be in the same spot saying, well, gosh, I should really use that water because it's evaporating. But the state kind of factored that in, and so you get that, at a different thing. We could do the same thing at Cachuma, where we could calculate an evaporation pool over the life cycle of the drought and try to calculate how your water could sit there evaporation free for 7 years, but it would come at a cost. There's no freebies here. It's going to come out one way or the other.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, very problematic when you get to this low, especially when you have other accounts like what's called the BNA, ANA, that's below narrows and above narrows accounts. Those are accounts in the lake set by the state for downstream water rights purposes, and by order of the state, those are not subject to evaporation at all. But yet it's a significant portion of the reservoir's volume now. Now that will be gone this summer. The downstream water rights release will start soon, July or August. And according to our meetings with the San Ynez River Water Conservation District, called the Parent District, they intend to exhaust that entire amount of water this summer, which will lower the lake even further. That's necessitating the move of the barge now, but will also lower the evaporation rates. So when that water is gone, any remaining carryover water will have somewhat less of a burden to bear in terms of evaporation. Are there any more questions on evaporation? That took up quite a bit of what I was going to talk about, but I was asked by Mr. Hagmark to talk about, well, how do you think we would handle evaporation in 2017? And that's a difficult question. What was it? Yogi Berra said the problem with predictions is that it involves the future. If we have inflow in 2017, which we all hope we do have, if it is not a significant inflow and on the order of tens of thousands of acre feet, then I think we have to look at, again, maybe establishing an evaporative pool to address this very issue, along with any allocation we make, because otherwise we'll just be right back in the same situation again. The ideal situation would be we get a big inflow, and then these accounts become a smaller portion of the lake, and then the unallocated water in the lake would be the evaporative source in the future. But it all depends on where we are in 2017. If we do not get inflow in 2017, and the minimum pool continues to evaporate at that point, because that would be the only water left in the lake, and it would be the only source that could evaporate, you could end up with a problem of getting your state water through the lake as that lake falls. I don't know at what point the pump barge would be ineffective below the 12,000. I know they factored that in when they moved that, so I think there is some room in there, whether it's a whole year or not. It might be something that the South Coast member units look into augmenting the minimum pool with imported water, especially during the months when your use is low, like in December and January, where there's capacity and you could move water in, understanding that comes at a cost, that water does cost you. And so, but again, this is your conduit to get state water to the South Coast as well. In terms of the contract for the project, the contract with the Water Agency and the Bureau of Reclamation is set to expire in 2020. It's suggested in the contract that we would start working on a renewal of that contract several years in advance. So I think that's something we're looking at starting at some point soon. As a part of that, I think we need to look at several factors in a new contract. One would be this evaporation issue when we get down this low, and how do we address it? Do we reserve an evaporative pool only when we get down this low? Do we go to a straight safe yield, which a safe yield approach would be calculate the critical drought period, and then using modeling look at what you could get even through this drought period. We might be redefining the critical drought period right now. We certainly are for the last 5 years, for the trailing 5 years, beats any previous drought period of 5 years, and some of those records, in the case of the city of Santa Barbara, go back well over 100 years. And in the case of Gibraltar Dam, which is our indicator for the San Ynez River, goes back almost 100 years. So with 100 years of record, this is the 5-year drought of record. Will it be the 7-year drought of record? That's yet to be seen. But these are things that we need to look at in a new contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. I think another issue that needs to be looked at is when we entered into this contract, there was an allocation that was put into the contract of 25,700 acre-feet per year. But several things changed since 1996. First of all, the reservoir, of course, has been subject to siltation, and although some of that was mitigated by raising the level of the lake in 2004 by 3 feet. But then also operations such as the downstream water accounts and fully understanding how those requirements affect the reservoir, and then also releases for endangered species steelhead fish downstream of the dam. That came in after the 1996 contract. So all of these things factor in that we never went back and looked at, well, what does that mean for the yield? So I think a new contract absolutely has to have a 5-year rotating recalculation of what the yield should be for the reservoir, because all of the member units get a number from the Bureau of Reclamation, say, wow, well, I have this much water a year. Well, you don't. You think you did, but you don't. And that's what we saw this year. This year you got 0. Whereas if we were on a safe yield that we had calculated at some point past, you might be looking at an allocation out of Cachuma between 15 and 20,000 acre-feet, and wouldn't that be nice right now? That also comes at a cost for the previous years because you got to make up that shortage with that more expensive water. But right now it looks pretty good. On top of the millions of dollars that it's costing to have this pump barge installed and operated, and so all these costs have to be weighed off as to what what is the best thing to do, and then so a 5-year cycle that recalculates what the yield should be based on whatever the new forces are going to be. We're going to have a new biological opinion that's going to come out of the National Marine Fisheries Service that may or may not change how much water has to be released from the dam for endangered species in the future. And if that happens, that will come directly out of your yield. It has to. It's a zero-sum game. There's only so much water in the lake. So all those things have to be factored in. Now, we have initiated a safe yield study for Cachuma, but in consultation with all your member unit managers, we agreed to stop at that point because there are some critical factors that need to be understood before we actually say, well, this is what the new safe yield of the reservoir is. First is, are we in the critical drought or not? Because if we have 2 more dry years, including potentially a year that has some runoff into it, over the critical 7-year period, which is 45 to 52, there was inflow of the lake, but over the 7-year period, it was the dry period. And So we have to really see after 7 years, where are we? And we're in year 5. So we really think we need 2 more years of data. If we spill next year, then we would go back and say, well, the 45 to 52 critical drought period stands. The other thing we need to know is, are there any changes from the state in terms of downstream water rights? That would have an impact as well. And then lastly, when National Marine Fisheries finishes its consultation with the Bureau of Reclamation, how much water will be released each year for fish? And until you have all those pieces, you don't really have an accurate, a safe yield. However, using what we have right now, we do know that the safe yield of the lake would be significantly lower than what it is right now, which is no surprise. That's what we see right in front of us with a 0 allocation this year.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, you talked about the timeline. If the agreement is up in 2020 and all those factors are still in the air 3 years from now, right, what's going to happen?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Davis, I think what we would have to do is use the information that we have at the time and then rely on a recalculation in 5 years.
Okay.
Because that would be the beauty of recalculating that through a 25-year contract every 5 years. Use the information you have at the time. That's all you really know. And then every 5 years, update it.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I think I would just summarize, if there's no other questions, that I think everybody, including the county, recognizes how crucial Cachuma is as a water supply reservoir. I will mention that the Bureau of Reclamation also considers recreation as a co-equal project purpose and has value too. Now, we've had discussions with that about whether or not those two uses are at odds, and I submit to you they're not, because at no point has the park at Lake Cachuma ever said, hey, we need a lake that's this high. Understood the minimum pool is 12,000, understand the lake fluctuates wildly through time, they coexist. And included in that is the environmental resources that have developed out there. And if you've been out there, or if you haven't been on the Eagle Cruise, you need to go, even today. It's a fascinating place. Many of you may know I grew up going to that lake, and I really appreciate its natural wonder, and it's worth protecting. And a minimum pool at least protects a living lake rather than a wasteland. It deserves treatment like that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is any other questions or comments from the commission?
All right, well, I will continue then with
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank Mr. Favorham for coming, because I think it's been an eye-opening discussion for us in that regard, and your challenges going forward are pretty significant. So, we look forward to working with you, obviously.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and likewise, we're in this all together. We've been meeting monthly with your staff and other Cachuma member unit managers, and these issues are difficult, but we have to work through them together, and we appreciate your staff's attendance at all our meetings and working with us in a very positive manner. We appreciate that.
I appreciate your comment of quoting Yogi Berra's statement about that. Obviously, the hydrologic reality can be very different from what you forecast. The Colorado River is a classic example of how they got it wrong. And the idea of reevaluating periodically sounds very smart to me, so thanks.
So at this point, I'm just going to finish up with the discussion on Cachuma. The barge relocation is on track, and I think they have a tentative timeline of shutdown to move the barge in late June. Just wanted to bring in this picture here, just kind of explain what's going on. Local photographer picked this up. The intake to the tower is over here in this grassy meadow. Our current barge is sitting right here, and you can vaguely make out these little piles that go all the way over here. This is the contractor right now setting all these piles that they're going to tie the HDPE line to, and it's going to extend from its current location over to approximately here, where the new barge is going to be the existing barge is going to be relocated to in late June. But when you know how full this lake should be and the water should be over here and way beyond this point, it is pretty frightening. So, drought response capital, I just have one project I'm going to highlight here. It's the Desal Project update. They are pouring concrete pads over the last week or so for the treatment units. As you can see here, they have them in various stages. The actual treatment units are on a ship and in transit to Long Beach Harbor. They should be getting here, I think, next week or the week after. And then they'll be scheduling delivery to the site in early June. They'll be waiting for the concrete here to meet its strength before they set those treatment units on it. As far as the offshore work goes, they're working on satisfying permit conditions. There's a lot of assessment work that needs to be done. I do have to admit I've been kind of frustrated with this component of the project. We had been pushing the contractor to have completed some of this work back in November, and it's a little frustrating that this didn't take a priority for them, or they didn't find the time to fit this in. And so where we're getting down to it is we're running out of float in the schedule, and we're going to be talking about this, but their current schedule still shows water delivery in October, but there are a lot of threats to that schedule, and I just wanted to raise that, and I expect to provide even more information next month on that. The electrical work is on, it seems like there's a lot of stuff. The offshore work is on the critical path, meaning any delays are going to push that schedule. Electrical work is on the critical path. One of the key components to the electrical work, the contractor needs to finish up his end so that SCE can do their work, because ultimately these filters actually have to ripen, which means we need to bring in seawater for month and a half, ripen up these filters so that they'll do their job. And in order to do that, you got to have the power there to pump the water onshore to ripen the filters so that we can actually go into production. So there is a sequence of events happening. We do have a big high-level meeting with IDE and Kiewit next Wednesday, hoping to resolve some of this. We have been talking, and I think our consultant coined the word designated worrier. We need someone who is looking at all the different components and making sure they're coming together. It seems that everybody's kind of doing their thing, but we seem to be missing this designated worrier who's overseeing all of it and making sure everything is coming together simultaneously. We do understand this is a complicated project, but certainly we want the contractor to be successful. Our team, Corollo, who's been on site as well, has been, going the extra mile to say, have you thought about this? Are you working on this? Do you know this takes time? And so I do believe we've been working collaboratively with the contractor. I think everyone's intent is to finish this project on time, but we will keep the commission and the public informed of how this is moving along. As far as the Montecito water sales agreement, this was an item on today's agenda, which we pulled. I just wanted to briefly say that we have completed the funding agreement and provided that to Montecito. And at this point, they want to discuss that funding agreement longer. And so I don't have a timeline for how long those discussions are going to go on. This is basically to cover the costs associated with completing the water sales agreement. There's a lot of technical and legal services that are required to finish those negotiations. Once it is done, we will bring it back. Hopefully the timing works out that we can make it to Water Commission and Council. If there is, we do certainly want to keep this discussion moving forward. We will make sure that we do have another discussion with Council and there's with Water Commission, and that information is shared.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, what's the target date that the agreement's looking at for first purchase?
They, I guess, our mutual agreed time was to finish negotiations by October. And working with their general manager, we had laid out, these are the technical support services that we need to get to that point of being able to enter into an agreement, and so they're wanting to discuss. Right now, they're challenged with putting out up to $500,000 to complete the water sales agreement. They have some concerns about putting out that much money, and so I think we're going to continue to talk about that.
Okay, but let's just say on the critical path, they essentially, you complete the agreement. What's then the critical path construction-wise to get to actual deliveries?
Yes.
Rough.
Commissioner Davis, we have told them 2 years.
Okay.
2 years from completion of the water sales agreement. Based on what we know now, there's information that will be developed because the critical path right now runs through the conveyance system. We do believe we can complete the expansion of the desal facility in about 12 months, but ultimately what ends up being about 3 miles of pipe that needs to be put in, the permitting for that and design of that we anticipate could take up to 2 years. And I think what we want to do is kind of develop the preliminary design for that and confirm it is 2 years. It may be less, it may be more, so yeah.
And that would basically get the water to the South Coast conduit. So at that point, it conceivably could be delivered to other people besides Montecito also.
Correct. I think that the key is that we are preparing for the fact that we may have limited or no surface waters, and so in order to effectuate this water sales agreement, we would need this pipeline to move that water to them. Mm-hmm. So let's take you to Water Conservation Program, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Dyer to talk about that. Mm-hmm.
Jordan. Yep.
Going back to recycling, I'm trying not to read between the lines partially. Are you giving up on that extra 1 million gallons a day of recycling?
I am not. I'm just I'm really focused on right now is getting through this summer and meeting the peak demands of this summer, and continuing to work on the long-term solution.
Is there any moving forward on
Oh, your mic's.
But is there any moving forward on discussion on liability for what we paid for versus what we're getting? And is it a equipment mistake, or is the initial assessment of being able to get to 1 million or 2.5 million gallons per day just wrong?
There, due to the legal issues involved in this, I can't go into a lot of details, but it is extremely complicated, and there is responsibility by the original designer. There is responsibility involvement in the contractor and the contractor subs that make resolving this complicated.
And is it technically feasible to do 2.5 million per day?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not an option out there that's still not attainable.
Right. It is obtainable with the right equipment, operating in the right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I probably don't have to tell you that every time we have a report on that, or it goes out to the public, that's like the number one question.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how did we get in this situation, and what are we doing to fix it? So
Yeah.
I appreciate that there's legal nuances that have to be watched there, but that's the number one question I get pummeled about every time somebody says, well, we're still having a problem with recycled water. So.
Yeah. And I, more than anybody, share that frustration. I believe we're doing everything we can internally to try and get this facility to maximize what it can produce, at least to this peak summer demand. After the peak summer demand, the facility has no problem keeping up with the rest of the year, and focused on getting it to its design capacity will be the next hurdle after we get to the summer. Ms. Dyer.
Okay, my name's Kelly Dyer. I'm the Water Supply Manager. I'm speaking on behalf of Madeline Ward, our Water Conservation Coordinator, who could not be here today. We recently had our Waterwise High School Video Contest. This is an annual county-wide program in its 17th year. All high schools in Santa Barbara County can participate, and it's a contest provided by the network of Santa Barbara County water providers. This program is a good opportunity for local students to showcase their creative filmmaking skills. They prepare 30-second videos, and the videos are judged based on originality, entertainment value, accuracy, production quality, and value of the information. And the winning videos are used as public service announcement ads in movie theaters. Sponsors donate prizes to the first, second, and third People's Choice and Honorable Mention student winners. And the network of Santa Barbara County water providers award checks to the schools of the winning teams. So this year, $2,400 was donated to Santa Barbara County schools this year from this program. And the corporate sponsors were Ramada Santa Barbara, True Nature Landscape Architecture, Ewing Irrigation, All Around Landscape Supply, and NCM. So we thank all of the sponsors for this great program. This year, in 2016, there were 22 video entries. That's more than we've ever had before. The theme was water conservation in the forecast, how to be water-wise outside, rain or shine. And the winners this year came from Carpinteria High, the Dunn School, and Santa Barbara High. So congratulations to the winners, and we look forward to seeing the videos in the movie theaters. And now we have a short video clip of the first place winner. The first place winner was Waterwise Rain or Shine by Jeanette Fentone from Carpinteria High School. Okay. All right. Very nice. So the next item is our 2015